In a world where villains reign supreme, watch as a self-proclaimed living goddess makes a dramatic entrance into a bank heist, defying norms and leaving destruction in her wake. With futuristic weapons and an attitude to match, she effortlessly dismantles any resistance, all while delivering sharp commentary on society's flaws. But when an unexpected challenge arises from an unlikely hero, will her grand plans unravel, or will she prove why she's the most powerful villain in Starlight City? Just a quick reminder before we get started. Only 4% of my viewers have subscribed to the channel so far. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Thank you so much. Now start amazing story.
I smiled as the dust settled around me. I had to admit that was one of my more dramatic entrances. I always figured if you were going to do something, then you should do it with style, and a focused energy blast on a revolving door leading into a bank that wasn't designed to handle anything like a focused energy blast was always suitably impressive to the normals. Tellers and patrons alike looked at me in terror, shying away as I strolled through the bank like I owned the place, which, for the next few minutes at least, was more or less true. I could do whatever I wanted, and there wasn't anybody who could stop me. Damn, it felt good to be a villain. Of course, that didn't mean the normals wouldn't try to stop me. Movement out of the corner of my eye caught my attention. I turned and saw a chubby security guard wearing a white uniform and a badge that looked almost, but not quite entirely unlike the police badges from the local constabulary. He was in the middle of pulling out a gun, an ancient revolver, and moving the barrel towards me. The thing seriously looked like something some prop guy pulled out that had been sitting in the back room since the 40s, when gangster movies were still the big thing. I had to admire his tenacity and his ability to handle himself under pressure. The gun was only shaking a little as he trained it on me. Just enough to make him dangerous, but it was clear he knew how to use the piece, as though he practiced that sort of thing waiting for a chance to use it. Definitely not what I'd expect from an older bank security guard. Maybe he was former PD, though it'd have to be way former PD since everyone on the force since I started working knew better than to draw on me. Or maybe he was one of those guys who always wanted to be a cop but wasn't quite stupid enough to pass their entrance exams. Whatever. Not my problem. It's not like that gun was going to help him. He fired and time stood still. People screamed. I scoffed. Please. As though something as simple as an ancient six-shooter could actually be a problem when they had a living goddess in front of them throwing around the kind of futuristic weaponry that would make Heinlein drool. I lifted a hand and flicked my fingers as the bullet came towards me. It was easy enough to track it through the heads-up display I had overlaid on my mask. A focused energy field sprang up in front of my hand, and the bullet ricocheted away with a delightful ting. Only it wasn't entirely accurate to say that it ricocheted. More that I deflected the bullet away from me, and the energy of that deflection disintegrated it before it could do any real damage. Hey, I might be a villain, but I wasn't completely heartless. Collateral damage was always a pain in the butt. It always got the talking heads jabbering about how heartless and cruel you were. Basically, it was a PR disaster I wasn't interested in getting involved with, though it was difficult to resist the urge to create a PR disaster by disintegrating the security guard since he insisted on firing at me. Typical security guard, shoot first and ask questions later, never stopping to think that by trying to shoot me, he was putting the lives of all the innocent people in this bank at risk. I resisted the urge to vaporize him, but I did set my wrist, blaster to stun, and fired off a quick shot. I grimaced and hoped he didn't have a heart condition. There was only so much you could do with a stun setting on these things. The real world didn't work on Star Trek logic. He didn't look like the type to have a heart condition, but hoping was the best I could do. I certainly couldn't leave him conscious to keep firing that antique. I looked around the bank lobby and raised an eyebrow. Anybody else want to be a hero? Nobody moved. Nobody so much as breathed. Good. The last thing I needed was some normie with more testosterone than brains trying to impress their lady by trying to take me on. No. Actually, the last thing I needed was to rob a bank while there was a real hero, in plain clothes hanging out. Not that I was too worried. I wasn't the #1 villain in the city for nothing. The real heroes knew to stay away when Mama was working, but it would put a cramp in my plans if I had to take the time to dispatch some hero looking to make a name for him or herself on top of doing the usual work of robbing a bank. Good, I said with a nod. You all can go about your business. I'll be in the vault if anybody needs me." Everyone stared blankly. I put my hands on my hips. Come on. Does anyone here have more than a couple $100,000 in the bank? No one raised their hands. Figures. No one saved money these days. Then again, the system was sort of stacked against people being able to save, which was a big reason why I was constantly making withdrawals like this. Just what I thought. You're all insured. I waved a dismissive hand. Go about your business, and someone let the cops know I'm in the vault when they get here. I turned and marched off. I never understood why these banks insisted on keeping vaults full of actual cash money in this day and age. In a world where dollars were created with the push of a button, it seemed like a silly anachronism to keep the physical paper around. Not that I was complaining. An old-school robbery was a nice distraction. I needed a good distraction right now. Bank patrons and employees alike still cowered behind their desks or against potted plants as I walked through the lobby. I rolled my eyes. They always did that, even after I told them they were free to go. About business as usual. It's not like I was a normal bank robber taking people hostage. I didn't have any need for something as brutish as hostages. And it's not like I was actually taking any of their money either. Most of their transactions were electronic, and I couldn't care less what the tellers had in their drawers. I was after the bigger bags of money, good old-fashioned impossible to trace cash. I whistled a happy tune as I raised my wrist blaster to the vault, then frowned. Some enterprising bank manager had managed to get the vault shut before I blew the front doors. I knew they'd managed to get it shut because it had been sitting wide open when I walked in wearing plain clothes to scout the place before I stepped out and made the switch to my work outfit. Interesting, I said. Apparently that enterprising bank manager was going to make a stand. A young guy in a cheap suit and tie stepped in front of the vault door and held out his arms. "I'm not going to let you do this," he said. I cocked an eyebrow at him, and he swallowed. "If you're standing there in a minute, then you'd better hope you have superpowers of the invulnerability variety," I said. He held my gaze. That was new and unsettling. Unsettling in the normies shouldn't be standing up to a goddess sense. Not in the sense that I was actually bothered by him standing up to me. "You won't shoot me." "You don't kill civilians," he said, his voice only wavering a little as he tried to sound confident. I cocked my head. Now there was an unpleasant development. The moment it started getting around that you tried to avoid collateral damage, it gave the collateral damage an excuse to get in your way in an attempt to stop you from world domination. This asshole in a cheap suit was the embodiment of that old quote about having nothing but work once word got around that you'd gone soft. Of course, that assumed I had gone soft, which I hadn't. It was more a risk-reward calculation, and this asshole just fell on the wrong side of that. Unfortunately for him, there was an easy solution for that. I started charging my wrist blaster. It was going to take one hell of a blast to knock that vault door off its hinges, after all. The kind of blast that would go very poorly for whatever poor bastard was standing in the way when it went off. "Now you've put me in a difficult position," I said. The ominous hum of my wrist blaster filled the room. He tugged at his tie, and a bead of sweat ran down his face. "Now that I know you have absolutely no plans of moving, that you're using yourself as a human shield for a bunch of paper and metal that doesn't give a shit if you live or die, I have more incentive to blast you along with the door and use you as an example than I do to spare you." "You wouldn't," he said. I held my wrist blaster up. Energy crackled and little bolts of electricity arced back and forth in front of the barrel. The ominous hum was growing louder and louder, sounding like the sort of electric hum you'd get from a high-tension electrical wire with a couple of angry killer beehives hanging from it, and magnified by about 1,000. "Care to try me?" I asked. The suit swallowed one last time. That must be a nervous tick with the guy or something. And then he thought better of playing a game of chicken with the most powerful villain in the world and dove out of the way. A good thing, too, because I was completely serious about him being more valuable as an example than anything. I glanced at the indicators on my wrist blaster. The ominous hum was louder than I'd ever heard before. Strictly speaking, it was probably more charged than I needed even for this thick vault door, but I was in the mood for a little theatricality now that a stupid suit dared to defy me. He'd put me in a bad mood. That hadn't happened in a long time, and I figured taking out that bad mood on some of the property he was supposed to be protecting would be just the ticket. A little yellow warning light flashed on the wrist blaster. That meant we were about 5 minutes away from a meltdown that would take out a few city blocks at the very least. That wouldn't do. I might be angry, but I wasn't suicidal. I let loose. A bolt of crackling energy flew across the room and slammed into the door. I figured it was going to take a lot to open the thing, but apparently banks had started cheaping out on vault doors. The energy blast slammed into the metal, and the entire damn thing disintegrated. Disintegrated? Huh. That was new. Either my stuff was a hell of a lot more powerful than I thought, or somebody had decided to save a little money by getting a vault door that looked impressive but couldn't hold up to your average supervillain with a futuristic charged energy weapon, which was a major mistake if you wanted to hold on to your physical cash reserves in Starlight City. Oh well, that was their problem, not mine. It was time to get to work. Author's note. Thanks for reading. This is a story I originally published back in 2017 that became one of the most popular things I wrote. It has heavy HFY themes as time goes on, and I always wanted to continue the story. Now, with serialization online, I can do just that without worrying so much about books breaking even and all that stuff. Hope you like it. I stepped through the vault door and put up a force field behind me with a casual wave of my hand. My force field generator really only worked in small directed bursts, good for things like deflecting those bullets the guard shot at me with his little pea shooter, so if somebody really wanted to get in here while the field was spread across the entire entrance, they'd be able to. Only who would be silly enough to try something like that? They just saw me blow the vault door aside like it was cardboard, and then they saw me put up a force field that shimmered with just enough translucence to make out shapes on the other side. How could they know it wasn't going to disintegrate? Them if they touched the field? They didn't. Theatricality was as much a part of being a good supervillain as actually having gadgets that could follow through on some of my threats. If 1 out of 5 gadgets worked the way people expected, then they started to think 5 out of 5 gadgets were capable of vaporizing them or doing other nasty things if they dared defy me. Not to mention walking through that force field would take long enough that I'd have ample warning to turn and vaporize them, so it was really 6 of one and half a dozen of another as far as outcomes for anyone stupid enough to bother me while I was working. I glanced around the vault. There were some gold bars that had been rattled loose by the door's disintegration. There were piles of cash in giant bags. They didn't have anything as silly as giant dollar signs on them like cartoons would lead you to believe, but I'd stolen enough of them over the years to know a bag full of cash when I saw it. I held up my wrist computer. You ready, Korvac? Ready. Mistress, Korvac's metallic voice came through the wrist computer. I moved over to the back wall and leaned against it. I watched the translucent shapes of people running around outside the vault, no doubt trying to get out of the bank while the employees tried to figure out how the hell they'd get rid of me. I'm sure the police were being called, and I'd have to deal with that once I was back on the other side. I was counting on it, actually, but I didn't feel the rush I'd expected. Not like old times. I slumped against the wall and sighed. This wasn't nearly as distracting as I'd hoped. I tapped a button on my belt, and a long-range teleportation targeter materialized from the pattern buffer in one of my belt storage units. The problem with teleportation over long ranges without line of sight was it required something to home in on. Nothing like those stupid television shows that always depicted teleporters just working over ridiculously long distances. Talk about unrealistic. I mean, sure, I had one teleporter that was capable of working at interstellar distances, but the one time I'd actually used the thing, it ended up killing someone very close to me. The less I thought about firing that one up again, the better. With my luck, I'd accidentally opened a portal to some planet with aliens who were interested in conquering the pale blue dot I'd just brought to their attention. If there was one thing I didn't have time for right now, it was single-handedly fighting off another alien invasion. Do you have the coordinates, Korvac? Yes, mistress, Korvac said, remotely programming the long-range unit now. I still don't understand why you needed to make a personal appearance for this. I was starting to wonder why I'd made a personal appearance for this. Damn. Just transport everything out of this room in about 5 minutes, I said. You're not coming with? Nope, I said. I'm going to take the long way out. Maybe that'll be interesting. Whatever you say, mistress, Korvac said. I knew he was a bundle of vacuum tubes and circuits that could do a reasonably passable imitation of sapience, but there were times, like right now, when I almost thought he wasn't faking it. 2. Bad there wasn't a Turing test for smartassery. I could do without the sarcasm, Korvac, I snapped. So terribly sorry, mistress. Not for the first time, I regretted installing that extra module that gave him the ability to feel emotions. It had seemed like a good idea at the time. I figured it'd make him happier. I thought it might make him a more enjoyable conversational companion since he was the only person I had to talk to when I was busy in the lab. Damn, were there times I wished I had someone other than that stupid computer to talk to? Times I wished my meddling in forces best left untouched hadn't resulted in accidentally teleporting the one woman I'd ever loved halfway across the galaxy. But no. Adding in that emotion chip seemed to turn him into a miserable, depressed, misanthropic, and overly sarcastic pile of circuitry. And it's not like I could go back in and remove that emotion chip, since I'm pretty sure he had safeguards on most of his systems that'd try to vaporize me if I ever got close enough to his hardware for anything other than an authorized upgrade. He wouldn't succeed, but just trying would be enough of a pain in the ass that I didn't want to mess with it if I could avoid it. No, Korvac definitely wasn't the kind of computer to idly set by singing Daisy, while someone ripped out his circuit boards because they were displeased with his performance or annoyed by his homicidal streak. I glanced through the shimmering shield and sighed again. They definitely called the cops. At least there were darker shapes that looked very much like the local 5-0 lining up to do their impotent best to keep up the appearance they were trying to stop me from doing whatever the hell I pleased. To be perfectly honest, this job could have been a hell of a lot easier. Korvac was right in being just a little snippy and sarcastic. I could have hacked into the bank computers and created some money for myself and transferred it, all anonymous and friendly-like, into my untraceable bank. Accounts where nobody would ever know the money was even missing. I could have cased the bank, gotten the coordinates of the vault, walked into the lobby in civilian clothes with my belt on, materialized the long-range teleportation targeter into the vault using the short-range teleporter built into my belt, transported all the contents out, and then rolled around in the money, after sanitizing it, of course, because that stuff was filthy, on my bed back at the lab without anyone knowing the Great Night Terror was in their midst. Sure, there was always the risk of also transporting some unfortunate bank employee along with the cash, but a quick transportation back to the old coordinates, minus all the cash, usually took care of that. The only problem with that, no one would know the Great Night Terror had been in their midst. Every 2-bit villain in the city would step up and take credit for the job, and there would always be some doubt I'd done it even if I took credit. No, my reputation and my ego prevented me from doing anything other than a personal appearance for a job like this. Of course, the main reason I was out today was boredom. This whole thing he had gotten too easy. There were no new worlds to conquer. I was the top villain in a city that was filled with the greatest villains and heroes the world had ever seen, and there was nobody who dared challenge me. Boring. Night Terror, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up and nobody gets hurt. I frowned. Okay, the local cops pretended to challenge me, but that was always a token show of resistance, and it's not like they even tried that hard anymore. Give me a minute, I shouted through the force field. I heard muttering on the other side, but nobody said a damn thing. Hopefully they'd cleared out the bank so none of the civilians saw them following orders. We both knew the score. They didn't overwork themselves trying to grab me, and I made sure I didn't cause too much collateral damage, make them look too bad, or accidentally vaporize one of them while I was making an escape. No, you definitely knew you'd made it as a villainate when you went toe-to-toe with the cops so often that you gave one another professional courtesy. But the flip side of that professional courtesy was that it made the whole damn thing so mundane and routine. Take your time, Miss Terror. The familiar voice of the commissioner came through the loudspeaker. Huh. He must be bored today, too. We've cleared out any potential hostages, so don't get any ideas. Translation, they had cleared out anyone who might take a video of them cooperating with me and spread it on the internet. Good. Still, this was nothing like the early days when I was making a name for myself, when the people had no idea who Night Terror was. When I still had to prove myself against the best heroes the city had to offer, when I still had to fight for territory against the best villains the city had to offer, I smiled as I thought back to those days. That had been fun. Now, those heroes ran as fast as their powers would carry them in the other direction when they heard I was around. And the criminal element in the city was well aware that Night Terror's territory was wherever the hell Night Terror decided to be at a given moment. And it was also damn boring. There wasn't any challenge anymore. I'd hoped getting out and doing a good old-fashioned bank heist would be a nice change of pace from the boring research stuff I'd been doing recently. Stupid Korvac and his obsession with having me build. Him a giant death robot so he could get in on some of the city-dominating fun. Not that I planned on ever letting him actually get out and take the thing for a spin, but drafting the plans for a pointless giant death robot was the same exhausting work whether or not you intended the thing to actually see use out in the real world. Even more exhausting, considering I was building in multiple exploitable weaknesses and design flaws while cleverly disguising them, so he wouldn't know I was setting him up for a double cross on the off chance he tried to double cross me. Okay, I'm done here. Coming out! I shouted to give them ample warning. So much for a distraction. Now I felt more depressed than I'd been before I made this run. I reached down and made sure my wrist blaster was good and charged, that my shield was ready to go, and that the anti-gravity units and strength modifiers hidden in my suit were good to go. Hey, I might be bored, but I wasn't going to go into a fight with a handicap and throw the game. I was never so bored that I'd deliver anything less than a total curb stomp to my enemies. Well, I'd do less than a total curb stomp with the cops. They were just doing their job after all. But I still had to be good to go and ready to take on whatever they threw at me. We all had our parts to play. Everything was in order. Everything was always in order. It's not like I'd leave my lair if my reactor wasn't working properly, or one of the other numerous bits of body-enhancing technology that adorned my suit weren't good to go. I sighed. It was time to go out and be the scariest villain in the city. Again, it was time to make the police run in terror. Again, it was time to show any heroes who might be working in the vicinity exactly how futile it was to take on night terror. Again, yeah, just another boring day at work. I took a deep breath and let the force field drop. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.